If you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I love Wyrmwood products. But living in New Zealand, it's very expensive and really hard to get them here. So I usually try and have a go at making their products myself. And in this video, I'm going to make these sweet as little dice vaults. They're a little wooden container that can contain your 7 typical D&D dice. They're held together with strong neodymium magnets and have a little bit of sponge in them to make sure the dice don't rock around. By themselves, they look alright, but they don't look that interesting. So what I'm also going to do in this video is try and do some marquetry to decorate the front of them and make them look a bit cooler. So the great thing about a project like this is it justifies your inability to throw out the smallest piece of wood, because this could be gold. So I found a couple of pieces of maple that I liked, and I've taken them over to the thicknesser and I've taken them down to the exact thickness that I want the finished product to be. So the lid is going to be approximately 15 millimeters and the base is going to be 19 millimeters. So now I have the 2 pieces that I want, I can take them over to the CNC and route them out. Now this is a small, pretty affordable hobby CNC that Lanyu sent to me. It's pretty good for small projects like this, and if you're interested, check out my earlier video where I do an unboxing and a review and I go through the software I used and am still using for this project today. And if you're wondering, each side of the box took around about an hour to cut out, but as you'll soon see, I'm not using it to cut the entire box out. And because I only use the CNC to partially cut out the box part, I need to roughly trim off the excess wood on the bandsaw. Now at this point you might be asking yourself, why didn't you just use the CNC to cut all the way down through both pieces? And I could have, but the CNC takes quite a bit of time, and what I found is I can use the lip that the CNC has cut as a guide for a flush trim bit. So now I'm going to take it to the router table and use a flush trim bit and cut it down to the final size. Alright, I've got the basic shape of a bunch of these now, and you'll notice some of them turn out a little bit better than others, depending on the sharpness of your router bits, the type of wood you're using, the way the wind's blowing. You'll get a nicer finish than others. So now what we need to do is go and tidy up the inside of these first. And I'll get to why we're doing the inside in a minute. Now when I say clean up, I of course mean sanding. And usually I'd try and gloss over sanding because no one wants to watch you sanding. But sanding is a really important part of any woodworking project, and learning how to be more efficient with sanding makes woodworking generally more enjoyable. So to tidy these up, I could just get a small piece of sandpaper and start sanding away on the inside. And in fact, that's exactly what I did, and it took ages. Until I thought, there's got to be a better way. And the better way was dead simple. Let me show you how. So as you can see here, the main part we want to sand is actually in between 2 ridges. So we can't easily put a sanding block on there and sand. Or can we? All we need is a piece of wood exactly the thickness of the internal dimension there with some sandpaper on it. And after a quick trip to the table saw, that's exactly what I've got. Next up, we need some spray glue and some sandpaper. Spray a bit of glue on your stick and stick it down to your sandpaper. Then once the glue is dry, which shouldn't take too long depending on your glue, simply use a craft knife to trim the sandpaper down to the edges of the wood. And if you want to be extra efficient, you glue a different grit onto the other side of the standing stick. And there we go. In seconds, we've cleaned up the inner face of that and it's looking a lot better. We do still have a little bit of hand sanding to do on the inside to tidy things up, but most of the work is done already. So let's get that last little bit done before we can get to the outside. I should also note that having the sandpaper glued onto a straight edge makes it way easier to sand right into tight edges too. For the insides, I've made a smaller little standing stick that I can get in there and sand, but unfortunately most of it requires a ratty old piece of sandpaper and going around by hand. If you've got any ideas on how to make that easier, let us know in the comments. Alright, I've made a bunch of these now out of all sorts of different types of wood, and the middles are all sanded and good to go. Now the reason we've sanded the inside first is because we want to sand the outside pieces both together. And sanding them both together will make sure we don't have any ridge lines all the way around. If you were to sand them separately, if you sanded one a little bit too much, you'd have a lip on one side or the other. But now that the inside's sanded, we can put the magnets in, and we can use the magnets to hold the two pieces exactly in place where they will finally be, and then we can go and sand things. So let's go and put the magnets in. Now given how small these screws are, we could just screw straight into the wood, which is actually what I originally did, but I did have one crack the wood because we're so close to the edge. So I made sure to pre-drill all holes after that, and you can even use the magnet to help center your drill bit. Using a screwdriver instead of a drill is pretty important too, as even with pre-drilled holes, you could easily over-tighten the screws and split the wood or even the magnet. One thing I've noticed is if your holes for your magnets are a little bit too deep and the magnets sit in too much, the connection force between the lid and the base is not really good enough. So an easy fix for that is to get a little bit of paper. In this case I've cut out some little paper washers and just put it in the bottom there, and that's enough to pop the magnet up enough that it makes a better contact with the base. Now with the magnets in place, I can head over to the belt sander and tidy up the outside, being careful not to be too aggressive so I don't sand them out of shape. Alright, they're all sanded up and looking pretty good so far. We will put a chamfer around the top and the bottom, which will make them look really good. But first, I want to decorate them a bit. I thought these would be the perfect opportunity to try out some marquetry. If you don't know what marquetry is, neither did I. It's basically just putting inlays into wood. Classic marquetry is done by hand using scalpels or X-Acto knives or something, but I don't have that kind of skill, so I'm going to cheat and use a laser. I'm going to take you through a whirlwind tour of what I've done, and as a spoiler, here's a D&D Artificer label that I've done previously. Alright, let's get into it. So I want to put some D&D inspired symbols on these dice vaults. So I scoured the internet and found a bunch that I liked. And in particular, I'm going to use this one, which is like a wizard staff in amongst a fireball or something. And I'm going to engrave this on a maple dice vault. Now there's two ways I could do marquetry here with a laser. The first is I could engrave a pocket onto the vault itself, and then I could cut out the pieces and put them into the engraving there. The danger, however, is you engrave too far or do something that you didn't want to do to your vault and you've ruined all that work. The second way to do it, which I think is a little bit safer in terms of ruining your workpiece, is to get a veneer the same wood as your vault. Then you can cut the negative of your shape into that veneer and place the pieces of the other veneer colours into that, and then finally glue it on the top of the dice vault, and if the veneer you chose matches the dice vault, you won't tell the difference. However, If the veneer you have doesn't match exactly the wood on your dice vault, there is a trick you can do to get around that, and it looks really good. So I'll show you that at the end. So for this particular design, I'm going to choose 2 different colors of wood. One is going to be a darker, I don't know what type of wood that is, but that'll be a darker wood and that'll be used for the staff. And then I'm going to choose a sort of reddish color wood and I'm going to use that for the firewall. All right, let's head over to the laser and watch it being cut out. Over at the laser engraver, I usually put blue tape over the subject I'm cutting out, as it helps to prevent burn marks on the top of the wood. But as you're going to see soon, it's not always a good idea. This first piece is the negative of the pattern, and I've also set it to cut out the exact size of the dice vault, as this will make aligning the pattern much easier at the end. You'll also notice I'm using some small magnets to hold the veneer down, as the laser engraver's air assist can sometimes blow the workpiece out of alignment. So right about now, you might have an inkling of why the blue tape idea was a bad idea for this pattern. You see, the problem with putting blue tape on is you have to take it off again. And if the pattern's too delicate, well, you can see what happened. So after cutting a new piece, and then cutting all the interior parts of the pattern, this time we really do want to use blue tape, specifically on the side that will be the top of the pattern. This will allow us to carefully put the pattern pieces in place and hold them securely. So while we chose a bit of maple veneer, that maple veneer doesn't really match our maple as perfectly as we'd like. So a way to kind of hide that is we're going to cut another veneer and put that underneath our maple. And then when we do our chamfer, we're going to have this nice pin line over the other color to break up the difference between our veneer and our wood. It's now time to glue the veneer on. I'm using Titebond 1, which worked perfectly, and the only real thing here is, while you want to cover the entire surface, you want the glue spread pretty thin, as it can sometimes seep through the veneer depending on how porous the wood is. When it comes to clamping, we want a nice even pressure, so I used a couple of cawls on either side, and I was careful not to over tighten the clamps. After a few hours, it was time to take it out of clamps, and it felt a little like unwrapping a Christmas present. I couldn't wait to see how it came out. And I wasn't disappointed. It looked fantastic. The last bit of shaping to be done is a small chamfer around both the lid and the base of each box. This makes the vault look more than just a simple box and looks particularly striking with the double veneer pin line. I also wanted to shout out to a commenter of a previous video who reminded me about my router table pin, which was super handy for working with these small delicate pieces. After giving all the vaults a final sand, it's time to apply some finish, and as with most of my projects, I'm using Rubio Monocoat because it's just so darn easy. We could call the dice vaults done at this point, but there's one problem. The dice will rattle around inside, and we don't want that. So I looked online and I found this thin filter foam on Amazon that I could cut out to place in both the lid and the base of each vault. I wasn't sure how this would turn out using the laser cutter, and I thought I might have to cut them by hand, but the laser did an amazing job with no melted or crispy edges. I thought about gluing these in, but I figured there's really no need, as they fit nice and snug without falling out. And this way they're replaceable and you don't run the risk of getting glue where you don't want it. Well, that was super fun, and I'm really happy with how these turned out. I wanted to give a big shout out to Emma from Artisan Alcove. She gave me some tips and tricks on how to get started with marquetry. You should go and check out her stuff. She does real marquetry without lasers, and they look amazing. I'll leave a link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.